The story of the slaughter has been well told. The story of how buffalo were saved from manifest destiny is less well known. As the American West was turned to cattle, the last buffalo survived as outcasts in their own homeland, in fragmented, crippled herds, at a dozen private ranches, parks, zoos, and the isolated corners of Indian reservations. This is the story of survival and restoration in Indian country. It is the story of how we saved the buffalo and how they saved us.
Well, you know, they wanted to get rid of us. They thought a way to do that was to get rid of the buffalo, and consequently they would get rid of the Indians. But it didn't happen. We're still here, and they're still here, and we're going forward together to take care of each other, just as we did in the past.
For most of the 20th century, when people thought about saving buffalo in the American West, they thought about Teddy Roosevelt and William Hornaday, the Bronx Zoo, and Yellowstone National Park. Almost nobody thought about Indians. And then, in the early 1990s, change swept across the Buffalo Nation.
It's not a new idea at all. I mean, it's thousands of years old. We recognize that as we bring our buffalo herd back to health, we'll also bring our own people back to health. And that's what it's all about.
It was an unlikely vision at first. The idea that we, Indian country, with almost no resources and only a fading memory of what it had been like to hunt buffalo, might somehow save ourselves by restoring our ancient relationship with the Buffalo Nation.
It's a matter of moving together as a united group, trying to better ourselves and trying to take something back that was stolen from us. So I consider this basically an Indian war party.
It was a ragtag group of visionaries who gathered in Las Vegas in 1992 to form the InterTribal Buffalo Council. Some were Indian cowboys who had grown up in the saddle. Some were environmentalists. Some were tribal health officials.
Traditionally, we didn't have diabetes in the tribe. And when we look back at the native diets, it's the post-treaty diets that's caused so many problems for Indian people. And we were looking at providing a substitute food. And we're finding that returning back to the native diet is the best thing that we can come up with.
Some of the men at the first meeting had never seen a buffalo herd up close. We had no money, no plan for action, and many of our tribal governments were suspicious of our ideas. What we had was our old way of thinking about buffalo on the land. It was a vision that united us with our ancient relatives, but it separated us from hunters and ranchers, conservationists and park officials.
You got to remember, these animals were almost gone, they were almost extinct, and so were we as a tribal people. The buffalo are coming back strong, and so are we as a people. So they go hand in hand, and we have to keep that in mind.
After a century of conservation policies that removed humans from nature, ITBC proposed a radically new way of thinking. We argued that our cultures and traditions were integral parts of the buffalo ecosystem. Restoring buffalo to the landscape without restoring the relationship between the land, animals, and the tribes was doomed to failure. We are not a quaint relic of the past. We are essential to the future.
You know, if you go back and you look at the cultures, every one of our tribes, or the majority of our tribes, when it comes to buffalo, we have creation stories. The buffalo at some point and tribal people existed below the surface of the earth. We were brought up with the buffalo. The agreements were that the buffalo would take care of us, we would take care of the buffalo. There were covenants made between man and animal that have religious implications, but they also have everyday life implications. So can you have one without the other? Can you have buffalo on the landscape and tribal people without the interaction? Is that respecting the animal? No, it's not. That's the main difference between what we're trying to do and what other entities that have buffalo are trying to do, is we're trying to restore that relationship.
There's nothing ragtag about the organization today. The Eagle staff is now adorned with feathers of 63 tribes, from Oklahoma to Washington, from the North Dakota Plains to the Pueblos of northern New Mexico. Each with our own cultural relationship to buffalo, our own ceremonies, songs, and traditions. ITBC is now a federally chartered organization with an executive board that represents herds of more than 15,000, more than the number of buffalo in all federal parks and refuges combined. Annual membership meetings include hundreds of tribal leaders, herd managers, wildlife biologists, and government officials, all focused on bringing buffalo back to Indian country. The Taos Pueblo may seem like a strange place to tell the story of buffalo restoration, but the relationship between the buffalo and this hidden mountain fortress is ancient and deep.
The Buffalo and Taos Pueblo tribe, Taos Pueblo Indians people, go back centuries. The elder men from here used to go east, that way towards Cimarron, Clayton, into a plains country to hunt buffalo. They used to run into Pawnees, Poncas, the Sioux tribes, the Plain tribes. During the hunts, they used to make relationships, friends. Each kiva in here, there's 6 kivas, and we got a dance that some of those Plains Indians gave us.
And in their travels, they met a man named Charles Goodnight in the Panhandle region of Texas. And when there was no more buffalo to hunt, he would invite the Taos people to come directly to his ranch, where he would provide them with whatever they needed. It was in May 1929 when 18 head of bison came from the Goodnight Ranch to Taos Pueblo.
The animals who had once roamed free across the plains traveled by rail to Santa Fe, and then by truck into the mountains, where they found refuge in a 500-acre pasture in the heart of the Pueblo.
And then I remember when I was a little kid, my grandpa had the duty to go down and take care of the buffalo. And I used to hate going down there with him because it was cold in the wintertime. But all the men in the tribe had a responsibility of taking care of the buffaloes in those days.
The pasture was small, and the demands for meat and ceremony were too great for the herd to grow. But the creation of ITBC inspired the tribe to change their old relationship with the herd and create a new one.
They say this entire valley from mountain peak to mountain peak used to be luscious grazing land. But when they brought sheep into this area, the sheep tend to eat everything down to the root and then kill it.
Richard Archuleta is one of the original ITBC visionaries. When he became herd manager 25 years ago, the Taos herd was still fewer than 100 buffalo, packed into the original pasture set aside for the Goodnight herd. His vision for the future was almost entirely in his imagination.
Finger curl?
Today, Delbert Chisholm is the herd manager, and he is quickly turning Richard's vision into a reality.
The first and most important priority for our herd is for our traditional uses, and secondly, on a community basis, and which includes the buffalo meat that we do put into our school program and eventually into our senior program as well. We started that program 2 years ago with a grant from ITBC. We put the meat back into our school children in February of 2012. They've taken well to it, and it's something that we're going to continue to do to get the buffalo back into the diets of our children.
The Taos herd has grown to 200 animals, far more than the original pasture can support. The relationship between the tribe and buffalo may be deeply rooted in tradition, but the methods Delbert uses to supply winter feed to the herd through the cold Taos winters are thoroughly modern.
We came up with the idea of using subsurface drip irrigation. And basically there's just tape that runs from this side of the pasture to that side of the pasture, and just the pressure from the water is what opens the tubes. And we're looking to get at least 3 cuttings over here, 1,000 per cutting, and that'll be enough to sustain our current herd numbers.
Richard was the first to recognize that restoring the cultural relationship with buffalo would require the expansion of the buffalo range. In the tight confines of the Pueblo, surrounded by a modern city, it seemed like an insurmountable challenge. But in the mid-1990s, the Tribal Council authorized the restoration of 5,000 acres for buffalo and native wildlife. In the center of a larger 16,000-acre pasture on the north rim of the spectacular Rio Grande Gorge. The land had been heavily overgrazed by sheep for a century. The windmills and water tanks were broken and abandoned. The fences were in disrepair. The native grasses had gone to seed, and in their place sagebrush had taken over. With tribal funding and a grant from ITBC, restoration began in 2015.
So one of the first things we're going to be doing is we're going to treat the sagebrush, basically eradicate the sagebrush within certain areas as much as we can do of the 5,000 acres. And we're hoping that that will bring back a lot of the native plants that are within this area. We're going to move everything we have from the current buffalo pasture down here. Mainly it's going to be the handling facility. ITBC is instrumental in the development of this 5,000 acres. And then in the event that Tribal Council sees that we're doing what we promised them that we would do, there's always that opportunity of expanding the entire 16,000 acres.
Just like the buffalo and the tribe, native grasses have survived for a century in the soil. The restoration has been slow, a few hundred acres at a time. But where the sagebrush has been eliminated, native grasses have already begun to recover. Where the grassland recovers, native wildlife returns.
And amongst those native grasses, we're hoping that we'll have some of the medicinal plants that will be used by the bison to cure themselves, take care of themselves. And it's by eating this meat that we also take care of ourselves.
The main purpose of the 5,000 acres, of course, is moving the buffalo down there. But we see it at a bigger picture of creating that biodiversity and a natural habitat for the mule deer, pronghorn, and also we have bighorn sheep down there.
The buffalo is an animal that needs space to roam. Without ITBC's funding, that won't be possible. You know this song where the deer and the antelope play? That's what I envision. So the buffalo will be here long after I'm gone.
You know, back in the day, Standing Rock started with 6 animals. And today we have 300 and growing. If you look back at history of all our tribes. I guess that the loss of identity is there. Bringing back the buffalo is part of bringing back our identification as a people. And along with that comes the language, the song, the dance, the cultural, traditional customs. You see more and more youth coming out and getting involved. So, you know, the classroom is right there out on the prairie. No, your break is right there too. You know, we at Standing Rock take pride in preserving this magnificent animal for future generations to come. I know we got a lot of ceremonies. More and more people are coming back to ceremonies, and that's great. And that buffalo, they're the main object of these ceremonies. They gave us food, shelter, clothing, and spirituality is always part of that.
The homeland of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe straddles the border between North and South Dakota. This is the land of Sitting Bull and the Hunk Papa. 1,000 miles north of Taos, the reservation's broad prairies are in the traditional heart of Buffalo Nation, where the worst of the 19th century slaughter took place. Mike Faith is another veteran of the early days at ITBC.
We get them further down, guys, by the crowd. Let's close those the red gates furthest down, and still give them room in there so they don't get crowded up in there.
In the 1990s, many tribes managed their herds like domestic cattle. That was the experience that herd managers had grown up with, and it was the model imposed on the tribes by government officials who control the reservations. But as we became more experienced, the tribes rebelled against the idea that buffalo were livestock. Over time, we have organized our buffalo programs around the principle that buffalo are wildlife, part of a larger ecosystem, and that the herds are more than just a commodity. Each herd has its own internal family structure, whose complex social interdependence offers important lessons for their human relations.
You know, these animals are definitely herd animals. They, there's times where you'll see a calf, a yearling, a 2-year-old and a mom